Hey, what's up, Gio? We're going to move along here with our studies and what we're looking at for our proofs and our just our logical thinking. All right. Yesterday we talked about the inductive reasoning, how you know what's going to be next based off of clues that are giving you. We're going to talk today about conditional statements, which we call if-then statements. And what part is true and false and all that. And then we're going to use that information and we're going to slowly move into our proofs of here's what you're going to be given. Here's some information and can you get to the end? And it's kind of using detective skills. So that's where we're headed to. My first question to you, though, is what is the counterexample of if it is the weekend, then it's Saturday, right? If it is the weekend, so I'm giving you information, if it is the weekend, then it is Saturday. And that's not always a true statement because if it is the weekend, it could be Saturday or it could be Sunday. All right, so Sunday is the counterexample. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at this type of statement today. We call that a conditional statement. If it is the weekend, then it is Saturday. It's a conditional statement. Okay? So here's what we know. We're going to use these symbols P and Q. Why P and Q? I have no clue. But it's symbols that we're going to use. So this right here means if P, then Q. Okay? If P, then Q. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a conditional statement. It's a statement joining two events together based on a condition. All right, if we go back to that first one, the condition is if it is the weekend. That's the condition that we're looking at. It's the weekend, then what? Okay, so we have it in if-then form, if P, then Q, or again, using those symbols with the arrow. Each conditional statement is broken down into two parts, the hypothesis and the conclusion. The hypothesis is that conditional piece. It follows the if. All right? It's that condition. So if it is the weekend. So it is the weekend is the hypothesis. The conclusion usually, and there's a reason why I put usually follows the then, but it's the ending piece to it. It is the non-hypothesis. So really you're going to be looking for the if part. That's the hypothesis. Conclusion comes at the end, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about rewriting this statement using some more information and talking about are the statements true and false. So if the information and the hypothesis is given to you, is the conclusion a true statement? Okay? Is it a statement as a whole? All right, and that's what we're going to be looking at here today. Other information we need are going to be what we call the inverse, the converse, and contrapositive. We're not going to get there quite yet. We're just going to take a look at an example here of an if-then statement, a conditional statement. If a polygon has 8 sides, then it is an octagon. So what we want to do is we want to be able to locate the hypothesis and the conclusion, right? And we said above the hypothesis follows the if. That's the hypothesis. And then this makes then it is an octagon. That's the conclusion. Okay? Notice how, and again, this box saying if and then are not included in the hypothesis and the conclusion. The hypothesis is a polygon has 8 sides. The conclusion then, it is an octagon. Okay? So we're going to write a conditional statement. Given the information, what you have to do is kind of figure out what the conditional piece is. And in this first one, I'm going to use the two colors, and I'll highlight in red and blue here. All right. The condition is if the angle is a right angle. Okay. So what we would do is we would write if and it doesn't have to go in the exact order, right? Make sure it makes sense when you read it. If an angle is a right angle, then its measure oh, sorry, not it's, it measures exactly 90 degrees, okay? If an angle is a right angle, then it measures exactly 90 degrees, okay? Letter B here, I bring my umbrella when it's raining. Well, what's the condition? When it's raining, right? That's the only time I'm going to have my umbrella. So the condition part is when it's raining. So how am I going to write that? Whoops, wrong one. Yep, I'm at school doing this too. All right, so if it is raining, then what? Then I bring my umbrella. Same thing for letter C. Suzanne eats a snack if she is hungry. Well, this is the conditional part. She's got to be hungry for her to eat. So we would say if she is hungry, comma, then Suzanne eats a snack. All right, so here's the deal. All right, but way back when, in this one where I said the conclusion usually follows the then, this is a type of sentence right here, letter C, where that's not the case, right? Because there is no word then. We have if at the end or middle of the statement. That's not always the conclusion piece to it. So if she is hungry, so she is hungry, then Suzanne eats a snack. So if you're looking for the hypothesis, it's always following the if when we write those if and then statements, okay? All right, now we're getting into what we call negation, and then different ways to rewrite the conclusion in the hypothesis, and then seeing if things are true or false, right? So the first thing says negation. All we're going to do, think of words that, not, isn't, stuff like that, where we're going to use different words to make it sound the opposite of. That little tilde symbol, squiggly symbol, is this symbol for negation, okay? So when you're looking through here, it's saying negate the hypothesis, right? This is saying negate the hypothesis, negate the conclusion, right? The contrapositive is saying negate the conclusion, negate the hypothesis, okay? And then that arrow is just whatever's listed first goes first and second, okay? And then a conditional statement and the contrapositive are either both true or false. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the converse and inverse are either both true or both false, okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to practice the rest of this time writing these out, okay? So it's going to tell us, here's the conditional. Go ahead, write the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. All right, and our first sentence is, if a polygon has three sides, then it is a triangle. Is that a true statement, by the way? If a polygon has three sides, then it is a triangle. No, that's true, right? We don't call it a quadrilateral. We call only four-sided polygons quadrilaterals, right? So that's a true statement. Okay, now it says write the converse. Well, the converse says to flip-flop the order in which they're written, okay? And I'm looking right here. So we're going to write the conclusion first, hypothesis second. Well, here's what I like doing. I like highlighting. Why do I keep doing that? There we go. So has three sides, and then it is a triangle, all right? So when we are going to do the converse, it says just flip-flop the way we're writing them. So then we would say if it is a triangle, comma, then what? then the polygon has 3 sides. And as you're seeing, this is going to be a lot of writing. So if you want to use the typing function to make your sentences, go right ahead. I'm not going to worry too much about that. All right, well, let's see if that's a true statement or not. If it is a triangle, then the polygon has 3 sides. Now, that's true. All right, that's a true statement. Okay, the inverse. Okay, now we got to write the inverse. Well, what does it say up here to do for the inverse? It says negate the hypothesis, negate the conclusion. Okay, well, what would that sound like? Okay, what would that sound like? If a polygon does not have 3 sides, right? So you got to find a way to make it not what it is, right? So if a polygon does not have 3 sides, then it is not a triangle. Is that a true statement? If a polygon does not have 3 sides, can it be a triangle? No, it can't be, right? So that's true. If it does not have 3 sides, then it is not a triangle. That's also a true statement. And the contrapositive says negate the conclusion, put that first, and then negate the hypothesis and put that second. So then it's just really rewriting the inverse but flipping them around. So if it is not a triangle, then it is not a polygon with 3 sides. Okay? So that's what we're doing, right? It's just practicing today is just practicing writing the sentences. Okay? So go ahead, pause the video, and you try to write out the sentences to the best of your ability. And then, again, it might not be word for word what I come up with because, again, we're trying to make it make sense, but we got to keep the idea and the concept intact. We can't just rewrite, like in this one, if you play football, then you're an athlete. Well, we can't just say, well, if you read a book, then you're a reader, right? We're not going to change the words. We're going to use the concepts that are there. Okay, so go ahead, pause the video, try to go back up here and says, oh, it tells you exactly how we should have it, right? The conclusion, then the hypothesis negated, conclusion negated, all that kind of good stuff, right? So go ahead, pause the video, try the last 3 out, and then we'll see how we're doing, okay? So the converse is just switching the 2 around. Well, again, this is the conclusion. You are an athlete. Okay? Is that a true statement? If you play football, then you're an athlete. Well, that's true. You got to be athletic to play football, right? It doesn't, it's just the way it is. Okay? Converse, taking the 2 and flipping them around. So if Q, then P. If you are an athlete, then you play football. Is that a true statement? If you are an athlete, you play football. That is absolutely false. And why is that the case? Well, in order to be an athlete, you could play multiple different sports, right? So it doesn't have to mean you have to play football. So the counterexample to that would be any other sport besides football. Okay? So that's a false statement. Now the inverse is saying negate P, negate Q. Okay? So if you don't play football, then you are not the father. I mean, athlete. Right? That's a false statement too. If you don't play football, then you're not an athlete. Well, I could be an athlete and not play football, right? So that's why we said earlier that the converse and inverse, they're either both true or both false. Same thing, contrapositive and the original conditional statement go together. All right, and then that last one is you put negate and put the conclusion first. So if you are not an athlete, then you don't play football. Well, that's a true statement, right? If you're not an athlete, you're not playing football, right? So that's a true statement. Okay, go down here. If two angles have equal measure, then they are congruent. That is a true statement, right? That's true. Well, what's the converse? Flip them around. If they are congruent, then they have equal measure. That's true. Right, if they're congruent, they're equal measure, right? Inverse, if two angles are not equal or do not have equal measure, then they are not congruent. Well, that's true. In order to be congruent, they have to have the same measure, right? And now my handwriting is getting sloppy because I'm trying to go as fast through this as I possibly can. All right? Contrapositive, negate the end, and then put that first. If they are not congruent, then two angles do not have equal measure. Okay? And then again, try this last one. If a quadrilateral is a rectangle, then it has 4 right angles. Now this one's kind of tricky, right? See if that's true. If it has 4 right angles, then it is a rectangle. And you would say, oh, that's false because a square could have 4 right angles. Technically, a square is a rectangle. Just throwing that out there. So there's some of these that are subjective to how you're interpreting things, and that's okay, right? Inverse says, well, let's negate the first one. If a quadrilateral is not a rectangle, then it doesn't have 4 right angles. Well, again, interpretation-wise, well, if it's not a rectangle, then it can't be a square. Right? So is that a true statement? Yeah. If a quadrilateral is not a rectangle, then that's by definition it's a parallelogram that has 4 right angles. That's a rectangle. So if it's quadrilateral, it's not a rectangle, then it doesn't have 4 right angles. Right? Contrapositive is if it doesn't have 4 right angles. Can it be a rectangle? Nope. Then the quadrilateral. All right, so go ahead, practice writing the sentences and seeing if you can pick out if they are true statements or false statements. All right, nice job, guys. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions.